My name is Dan Murray-Serter, and I'm the co-founder of brain health and mental wellness company Heights, alongside my co-founder Joel Freeman. Welcome to Working In with Heights. It's a series all about optimizing the most important organ in your body, your brain. For this episode, I'm joined by one of our first and still one of our favorite customers, the wonderful Stephen Fry. And here are his thoughts on intelligence. Enjoy. It's time to introduce today's guest, Mr. Stephen Fry. So, Stephen, welcome to Working In. How are you feeling today?
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you very much indeed. I'm delighted to be here.
And how are you?
I'm pretty well, thanks. I'm in every sense. It's a cheap cliche, but I mustn't grumble is used all the time. But I don't think it's ever been truer that one mustn't grumble, because my blessings are numerous and profound, and I should be aware of them. I only have to think of how some people must be facing this crisis to realize how lucky I am to be with the person I love, and to be in a good condition, and to have fresh air and the ability to walk in the countryside and all of that. So yes, I'm very fortunate.
So in today's Cranium Gymnasium, we're looking to cover intelligence, mental health, and the sinful brain. So should we start from the top and get stuck into intelligence?
Yeah.
Okay, so the definition of intelligence is the ability to acquire, understand, and use knowledge. Now, given that you're broadly considered to be one of the most intelligent men in the country, how do you think you fare with that definition?
Well, I'm going to have to query the definition. It's a definition, the ability to. I think a lot of people have the ability to. The question is whether there's the will and the energy to do it, the drive to do it, the concentration to do it. Sometimes I wonder really if intelligence isn't a bit like what Sherlock Holmes said about genius, an infinite capacity for taking pains. It's the effort of it. I often feel I've just sort of spunked my intelligence up against the wall to some extent. I think I am quite gifted, in terms of the important useful attributes that are subsets of intelligence. Memory, key, absolutely key to that, because I have a good memory, and really pattern recognition, isn't it? And the ability to see things inside other things, which is why language is always such a clue as to the real meaning of words, because you can give a dictionary definition, but it's the derivation, intellegere, to read into, is what intelligence, intellect means. And you read into things. So there's a poetic intelligence which reads the history of human desire in the fall of an acorn from a tree, or the brush of a wing of a butterfly. That's seeing into things. So the great thing about the language, the word intelligence, is it doesn't need division into cognitive, mathematical, intellectual intelligence, which is a bit of a tautology. It's all about that seeing into, I think. And to see into, you've got to look into. So first of all, you need the curiosity, the drive, because the difference between seeing and looking is like hearing and listening, isn't it? You can see all kinds of things, but you don't notice them, but you've also got to move your head towards them. You've got to be interested. And I think one of the tragedies of much of life is how many of us are really all as intelligent as each other, but some people just don't have the drive to find out. They've either been made afraid by education that has made them feel left out, that somehow certain words, phrases, references, they've decided they can't catch up with. Just as I feel like that, a bit like that with music. I can pick out single notes with my fingers on the piano and build them into a chord, but I can't sight read. And I decided, 40 years ago, that it was too late, which is nonsense. It's never too late, but you make that decision. So a lot of it is to do with will, I think, Daniel. Would you agree with that?
I think you're certainly right in terms of the intention and the desire needs to be there. But I think a lot of what you just said was also true in circumstance and upbringing. There's there is definitely an interesting class divide when it comes to intelligence, which is essentially a lottery of where you can be born. And that doesn't take away obviously anyone's natural drive to change those things, but I guess it can also be considered, at least as part of the debate.
Yes, I mean that's a very, very A very huge subject, isn't it? I mean, I think the actual intelligence and capacity and capability of all humans is more or less the same, within an ambit of, in as much as we can all, without a deficit at birth or a trauma, we can all walk and we can all run, but obviously some people are going to be able to run faster than others. And that can be to do with training, and it can be to do with just innate, physical ability that they've somehow been born with. And the same slightly with the mind, isn't it? I mean, given you don't have a deficit of cognition, everybody is within the same band, but there'll always be some people who are a bit faster and some people are a bit slower. On top of that, as you say, there is upbringing. There's how much your parents read and how much they read to you and all kinds of things which are terrifying. But again, they tend to reinforce this idea that things are too late, because you'll read, having your mother read to you when you were 3 is a sign that you are likely to get a bit more A's at A level than if she didn't. Well, if your mother didn't read to you and you come across this statistic, you're going to go, oh, well, what's the point then? I give up. And that's nonsense, because none of these things is defining. One of the most important things, I think, that we have to address, because it's also relevant to this crisis, is the fact, again, oddly enough, that Sherlock Holmes pointed out in the very second Sherlock Holmes story, which is called A Sign of Four. He says to Watson at one point, it's not relevant to the story, he just makes the observation that while you cannot predict what a single person will do, you can never predict what a single person can do, you can predict with an astonishing amount of precision what an average number of people will do. And that's more shocking, really, than most people would perhaps think. It's the basis of all behavioral science. And I think in this crisis, we're all aware that there are virologists and epidemiologists who have the ear of government. And when government says we're following the science, we all think, oh, well, they're following virologists and epidemiologists. But sitting in on those SAGE meetings and COBRA meetings and subcommittees are dozens of behavioral scientists who can model our behavior in the same way as an epidemiologist models the course of the disease, with its famous peaks and so on. And that's, of course, why Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance, the chief medical officer and the chief scientific officer, why they said we didn't bring in the lockdown until the date we did, because we wanted the peak to coincide with the population still putting up with it, because they're aware that we will stop putting up with it and that we'll become more and more lax about it, more cross about it, more upset, more unhappy. And that will affect our health, in our mental health and our physical health. And you can't say that of any individual, but you can say it of the average of humanity. And it's the same with, so when you talk about this is what makes people intelligent, but you, this person listening, you're different. Every one of us is an individual, even though as an average, we can be plotted and predicted. And that's a strange paradox about human behavior, but I think a very important one to bear in mind, whether you're talking about something as loaded as intelligence or something as urgent as this particular crisis.
And it's interesting because the example you give kind of plays nicely into EQ, emotional intelligence, realistically. Because that's part of what that is modeling, right? Which is our capacity for the patience and understanding as a society to do these things.
Yes, I suppose it is. I mean, these things leach into other words like wisdom. We're fully aware of the difference between intelligence and wisdom, though it's quite hard to pin down. At a sentimental level, one can say that you can go into a developing country and see an old person who may not be able to read or write and has no knowledge of the abstract intellectual things that make an intellectual, but you can watch them behave and say this person has extraordinary wisdom. And I sometimes wonder what the point of intelligence is when wisdom is so much more handier thing. The best definition of wisdom I ever came across was a man called Michael Ramsey, who was the younger brother of one of the great intellectuals of the 20th century called
Gordon Ramsay.
No, called Frank Ramsay, who by coincidence there happens to be an article about in the New Yorker at the moment. But anyway, Frank Ramsay died at the age of 26 and was really quite an extraordinary genius. But his brother Michael, there's my computer going, sorry about that. His brother Michael became Archbishop of Canterbury, and he had huge white eyebrows. And when I was a boy in the 60s, I just saw him being interviewed by someone like Malcolm Muggeridge. And they said, Your Grace, you are accounted by all who know you to be a very wise man. And to look at you, one can say that you look wise. And Michael Ramsay said, Am I wise? I wonder if I'm wise. Am I wise? And the interviewer said, Well, what would Your Grace say is a definition of wisdom? He said, Oh, wisdom. I think wisdom is the ability to cope. And that's always stayed with me. Because we're all aware of the chess genius, the math genius, the musical genius who can't sit the right way on the lavatory, who's just completely incapable of either socializing or connecting with other people or with ideas or with them, anything that we might consider deep and fulfilling in life, and yet they are clearly a genius. And we look at people who have wisdom, like I suppose it's Mrs. Wilcox in Howard's End, sort of characters like that who and in fact, Mrs. Ramsay, talking of Ramsays, Into the Lighthouse, the Virginia Woolf novel, how peculiar. There seems to be a Ramsay Day. Anyway, sorry, I'm beginning to babble, but I suppose what I'm talking about is not being sure, not knowing is the greatest privilege of intelligence, because if you're intelligent, you have the confidence to know the limits of your knowledge and don't have to prove to anyone else, I know this, I know that. You're actually much happier to say, I don't know this. I am completely ignorant about this branch of philosophy or this branch of science and mathematics. I only vaguely know it as an idea. I'd love to know more about it. And you define yourself by the limits of your knowledge, and you're happy to do so.
I am going to go to a couple of the questions, though, just so people are aware that they're definitely going to get them answered. We've got a question from Julie, who says, can being intelligent be a drawback in keeping a healthy mind? Can you overthink, do you think?
I think you have to have, if you want to divide it into these kind of different types, you have to have the emotional and intelligence to realize that problem-solving intelligence, quickness of mind, the ability to, whether it's play chess and solve puzzles and absorb abstract ideas and remember them and repeat them elegantly and be in charge of language, and that sort of intelligence is not going to help you with problems of mood and love and emotion and feeling and betrayal and all the things, all the storms in the mind that can drive one to intense feelings of misery, right to the very brink where you really wish not to live anymore, that you cannot solve them with the same intelligence that you can solve a crossword puzzle or a chess problem. And to think that you can, to say, all right, now, come on, I've got this problem. There must be an A and a B and a therefore and a syllogism and a sort of series of steps in logic that can bring you to the end. Because I may be proved wrong, but I just don't think that that's the right. It's like trying to tune a piano with a lawnmower. It's just the wrong tool for the wrong job. So I think the most important thing is to have enough emotional intelligence to let go of your problem-solving cognitive intelligence and to try and use your sense of what's right and what's working, and also to let down your defenses, your pride, because the problem with intelligence is it can lead to a very strong sort of intellectual pride, which can't accept that you need to ask for help.
I think that's often just called being a man asking for directions.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to do a last question on intelligence, and then we'll move on to our next topic. But Karma, amazing name for this question. How do you think intelligence is limited by poor mental health state or poor sleep?
That's a really good question. I suspect that the answer is greatly. Almost every day, certainly until this crisis, there seemed to be a new article in a newspaper or a journal linking sleep and poverty of sleep with all kinds of problems. If sleep is coming easily to you, it's a sign that other things are going right in your life that I think will help with your intelligence and with your happiness, which is more important. If people start to feel bad because they've only had 6 hours sleep and they've read that it should be 6.5, 7, or no, someone else said 7.5, and they'll start punishing themselves or feeling that they've failed. One of the most important things in mental health in all areas, I think, is to forgive yourself, to learn. It's to forgive others, certainly, but to forgive yourself primarily for mistakes. In the same way as it is with going on a diet or anything. Yes, you will fall off the wagon. You will, make a mistake. But if you believe that that shuts out any chance of success, then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I think all these things are clearly important, and they are important to intelligence. But I think it's a huge mistake to get absolutely obsessed by them.